The teacher called me at work and said she would start confiscating my daughter's insulin every time she faked a diabetic emergency. Mrs. Voss called me at work on a Tuesday, right in the middle of my shift. Your daughter is faking her sugar crashes again. She uses them every single time there is a test. I am not rewarding this behavior anymore. Come get her. I set down what I was holding, told my supervisor it was my kid, drove 12 minutes to Bellhaven Elementary. I found my 7-year-old Sadie sitting on the floor of the front office, gray in the face, sweating through her shirt, her words coming out slow and scrambled. The office aide stood over her, not knowing what to do. Mrs. Voss leaned in the doorway with her arms crossed. She is putting on a show. She always does this right before a test. I dropped to my knees, pulled Sadie's meter from my bag, pricked her finger. 39. I have been type 1 diabetic for 20 years. I know a low when I see one, and this was the kind that ends with an ambulance. 39 is where a person stops making sense, where they slur and go limp, where the next step is a seizure. I tore the straw off a juice box, put it to her lips, told her to drink. That is not a real low. Her machine beeps for attention and she milks it. I muted it 3 times today. You muted her monitor. That thing shrieks every 20 minutes. It disrupts the whole class. I could not answer for a moment. The device that was built to warn us the instant her blood sugar started falling, the one alarm standing between my daughter and a coma, and this woman had been switching it off because the sound annoyed her. Sadie finished the juice. I gave her a second one. Slowly, the color came back into her lips. She looked up at me and asked if she was in trouble. I told her no, baby. Never for this. Mrs. Voss watched the whole thing and did not change her expression. Sugar or not, she cannot leave my classroom whenever she feels like it. There are 25 other children in that room. She has a medical device for a reason, I said. You do not get to turn it off. I have worked with children for 18 years, she said. I know the difference between sick and spoiled. I took Sadie home. That night, her numbers would not settle. She was wrung out from the crash, shaky, scared to close her eyes in case it happened again in her sleep. I sat on the edge of her bed until midnight, checking her every hour, watching a 7-year-old apologize to me for a disease she did not ask for. She kept saying she was sorry for leaving class, sorry for the noise her monitor made, sorry that her teacher was mad. I told her none of it was her fault. I am not sure she believed me. She had spent weeks being told by an adult she trusted that her own body was a lie. This was not the first time. It had been building since the start of the school year. In September, Mrs. Voss sent home a behavior note saying Sadie was distracting the class by getting up to eat. In October, at the parent-teacher conference, she said it to my face for the first time, that she suspected Sadie had learned her low blood sugars got her out of hard work. I brought Sadie's care plan to that conference. I explained what a monitor does, what a low feels like, why the juice cannot wait. Mrs. Voss nodded the whole time and I left thinking we understood each other. I found out later she wrote in her own notes that day that I was, in her words, coddling a manipulative child. Every week after that there was something. A note, a phone call, a comment about theatrics. I had been so busy explaining and re-explaining that I never once stopped to consider that the problem was not that she did not understand. The problem was that she had decided, and no amount of doctors or graphs or care plans was going to move her. Wednesday I kept her home and called her endocrinologist. Dr. Amari's office fit us in that afternoon. I told her everything, the muted monitor, the missed catches, the 40-minute lows that nobody treated. Dr. Amari's jaw tightened while I talked. She pulled up Sadie's monitor history on her screen, the last 2 weeks of it, and turned the monitor toward me so I could see. There were red valleys all across it, deep drops during school hours, some lasting half an hour, one lasting almost 50 minutes. Every single one of these should have set off an alarm and put juice in her hand within minutes, she said. Instead, they just sat there, untreated, for as long as an hour. Do you understand how close some of these came? I understood. I had been reading my own version of those graphs for 20 years. A low that deep, left alone, does not stay a low. It becomes a seizure. It becomes unconsciousness. In a small body, it can become permanent. Dr. Amari printed the entire record, every drop, every timestamp, and then she wrote a formal letter on her office letterhead. Sadie required continuous glucose monitoring at all times, unrestricted access to fast-acting glucose at all times, immediate treatment of any reading under 70. She underlined the last line twice and signed it. Denial of these accommodations, she wrote at the bottom, constitutes a direct and foreseeable threat to this child's life. Then she crouched down to Sadie's level, the way good doctors do, and she took my daughter's hands. Sadie, she said, I want you to hear me say this. Your body is not lying. When your monitor beeps, it is telling the truth. When you feel low, you are not making it up, and you are never in trouble for it. Not ever, no matter what any grown-up says. I want you to promise me you will ask for your juice every single time, even if you have to be loud about it. Sadie looked at her, and then she looked at me, and something in her face that had been folded up for weeks loosened a little. She promised. On the way out, Dr. Amari touched my arm and said, more quietly, the thing she had not said in front of my daughter. I have signed a lot of these letters, she said. I do not underline the last line twice for most of them. Whatever you have to do, do it. I drove home with that letter on the passenger seat like it was made of glass. Thursday, I brought Sadie back and asked to meet the principal before class. Mr. Radley kept me waiting 20 minutes in the front office, then barely looked up from his monitor when I finally sat down across from him. I put Dr. Amari's letter on his desk and explained what had been happening. He read the first paragraph, maybe. me, and then slid it back across the desk toward me. Mrs. Voss is our most senior teacher, he said. If she tells me a child is being manipulative, I trust her red of the room. My daughter's blood sugar hit 39 in your building on Tuesday, I said. That is not manipulation. That is a medical emergency your staff caused by turning off her alarm. Children learn very fast what gets them out of doing work, he said. Sometimes the kindest thing a school can do is not indulge it. I asked him to read the whole letter, all of it, the part a doctor had underlined twice. He said he would look into it. The way he said it told me he would not. He had already decided who I was before I sat down. Before I left his office, I asked him for a formal accommodation plan in writing, a legal one, the kind the school is required to follow. He sighed like I had asked him to move a mountain. He said the school counselor handled those and that they were backed up for weeks. I said my daughter did not have weeks. He said he would put in the request. That afternoon, I called the counselor's office myself and left a message. Nobody called me back. I looked up the law that night at my kitchen table. A child with type 1 diabetes qualifies for a written plan that spells out exactly what the school must do, and the school is legally required to follow it once it exists. Sadie had one from her old school from kindergarten. I printed it, updated it with Dr. Amari's letter, and I hand-delivered a copy to the front office the next morning with a signature line asking them to acknowledge receipt. The aide took it and set it on a pile. I asked her to make sure Mrs. Voss got a copy. Later, I learned Mrs. Voss did get it. She read it, and she told the aide that a piece of paper does not run her classroom, and she put it in the same drawer where she kept the confiscated glucose tabs. Friday, I sent Sadie in with a backup meter clipped inside her backpack and a note taped to the front pocket begging them not to touch her monitor. At 11, Mrs. Voss called again. Your daughter took food out of her desk during silent reading, she said. We do not allow snacking in my classroom. I confiscated it, and I took the little beeping device too, since the food and the noise go hand in hand. I have had enough of the disruptions. You took her glucose tabs, I said, and her monitor. During school, yes. And if there is another episode, she can sit in the office until you come collect her. I am finished with the theatrics. I told her to give it all back to Sadie immediately. She hung up on me. I called the front office 4 times in a row. Nobody picked up. I left work again, drove over again, and by the time I reached the building, Sadie was already in the nurse's room with the school nurse, a kind, tired woman named Bess, who had found her wandering the hallway confused and walked her in. Bess had already tested her, 52 and falling, she told me under her breath, so it would not carry through the door. I gave her juice. I have been trying to tell people for weeks that something is wrong in that classroom, and nobody wants to hear it from me either. Bess handed me Sadie's monitor and her glucose tabs, which she had taken back from Mrs. Voss's desk drawer herself. I am not supposed to go into another teacher's desk, she said, but I was not about to let a 7-year-old ride out a low because a grown woman wanted to prove a point. She was the first adult in that building who had acted like my daughter's life was worth something. I hugged her before I left. On the drive home, Sadie finally told me what had happened in the classroom, the parts I had not seen. She said that when her monitor had buzzed that morning, before Mrs. Voss silenced it, she had raised her hand and said she felt low and needed her juice. She said Mrs. Voss had walked to her desk in front of everyone and asked the class loudly whether they thought Sadie really needed juice or whether Sadie just wanted to be special. She said some of the kids laughed. She said she put her hand down and did not ask again, even when the room started to tilt, because she did not want the class to laugh at her a second time. My 7-year-old had learned to sit quietly and let herself sink rather than be humiliated by a grown woman. I had to pull the car over. I told her that she had done nothing wrong, that she was allowed to ask for what her body needed every single time, that no one, no teacher, no one, was ever allowed to make her feel small for staying alive. She nodded, but she was watching me cry, and I could tell she was filing that away too, the way children file everything. That weekend, I did not sleep. I lay awake running through Monday in my head. What if it happened when Bess was out of the building? What if the monitor was muted and the tabs were locked in a drawer, and Sadie went down in a room with a woman who had decided in advance that any symptom was a performance? Sunday night, I made a decision that I would not just keep fighting phone call by phone call. I sat at my kitchen table and I built a file. I printed Dr. Amari's letter. I printed the 2 weeks of monitor data with every red valley. I wrote out every call from Mrs. Voss, the date, the time, the exact words, the muted alarms, the confiscated tabs, the 39, the 52. I called Bess at home and she agreed to write down in her own hand what she had seen. On Saturday, I wrote a formal complaint and emailed it to Mr. Radley and to the district's general inbox, laying out every incident with the dates, attaching the doctor's letter and the monitor graph, and asking in plain words for someone to intervene before my child was hurt. I got an automatic reply from the district saying my message had been received and would be routed to the appropriate department. Sunday afternoon, Mr. Radley answered. His email was 3 sentences long. He said he had spoken with Mrs. Voss, that she assured him she was following all reasonable guidelines, and that he considered the matter resolved at the building level. He signed it warmly. I read it 4 times. I had put a doctor's warning and a graph of my daughter dying by degrees in front of a man, and he had answered that the matter was resolved. By Sunday midnight, I had a folder an inch thick, and I still made the mistake that almost cost me everything. I sent Sadie to school Monday. I told myself the note would hold, that Bess would be there, that surely after all of it they would not touch her monitor again. I was wrong. At 1:40 that afternoon, my phone rang, and it was not Mrs. Voss. It was the front office, and the woman on the line was not calm. "There is an ambulance here for your daughter," she said. "You need to come now." I do not remember the drive. I remember running through the front doors and seeing two paramedics on their knees in the hallway outside Mrs. Voss's classroom, and Sadie on the floor between them, and her small body was shaking in a way that was not shaking. It was seizing, her eyes half open and rolled up, a line of spit down her chin. A paramedic had a tube of glucose gel against the inside of her cheek and was talking to her in a low, steady voice. Mrs. Voss stood a few feet back with her arms crossed, and she was talking too, and what she was saying stopped my heart. "She does this," Mrs. Voss was telling the second paramedic. "She fakes these episodes. Her mother encourages it. You do not need to do all of that. She is fine. She is just being dramatic." The paramedic did not even look up at her. He had a glucometer in his hand. He called out a number to his partner. 29. Get the glucagon. 29. I had never seen my daughter's blood sugar that low in her life. 29 is not a discipline problem. 29 is a body shutting itself down. The paramedic pushed the glucagon and kept the gel against her cheek, and after the longest 90 seconds of my life, the seizing slowed and then stopped, and Sadie went limp, and then she made a small sound, and then she started to cry, which meant she was awake, which meant she was alive. I was on the floor holding her head. The paramedic looked up at Mrs. Voss for the first time. "Her monitor is switched to silent," he said, "and it is not on her body. It was in your hand when we arrived." Where was her fast-acting sugar? Mrs. Voss said something about a drawer. The paramedic's voice changed. This child was in a severe hypoglycemic seizure. A few more minutes without treatment and we would not be having this conversation. "Do you understand what you are telling me you did?" Mrs. Voss said the mother was a nurse and knew how to work the system. The paramedic stood up. "Ma'am, I have run a lot of calls. I know a real emergency from a fake one, and this little girl was minutes from dying on your floor." He turned away from her like she was not worth another word and helped me get Sadie onto the stretcher. In the ambulance, the paramedic told me quietly that he was required to file a report on what he had witnessed, and that in his years on the job, he had never seen a school employee actively try to stop treatment during a seizure. He said he was sorry, and he said it like he meant it. He wrote my daughter's numbers on his glove so he would not forget a single one. At the hospital, they moved fast. They ran a second line, checked her for the ketones that come when a diabetic body goes too long in crisis, watched her heart on a monitor, drew blood, and slowly, over the next few hours, Sadie came all the way back to herself. The doctor who admitted her sat with me after and did not soften it. "A blood sugar of 29 in a child that size with a seizure is a true emergency," she said. "If the paramedics had been even a few minutes later, we could be having a very different conversation right now." She asked me carefully how a child on a continuous monitor had been allowed to fall that far without anyone catching it. I told her. The doctor wrote it all down, and she told me she was a mandatory reporter and that she would be documenting suspected medical neglect. "Good," I said. "Please do." They kept Sadie overnight for observation. She held my hand the whole time and asked me in a small, hoarse voice whether her teacher was still mad at her. I told her that her teacher was never going to be able to be mad at her again. I did not know yet how I was going to make that true, but I knew that I would. Tuesday, in the hospital, I did not send her back to school, and I never would again. I got the paramedics' names for the run report. I got the emergency room record that said severe hypoglycemia, blood glucose 29, hypoglycemic seizure. I added it to the folder, and now the folder did not just say a teacher was cruel. It said a teacher had nearly killed a child. Wednesday, home from the hospital, I decided to find out if we were the only ones. I posted carefully in the school parents group. Nothing accusatory, no names. I just asked whether anyone else's child had a medical plan that was not being followed at Bellhaven. Within an hour, my phone would not stop buzzing. A mother whose son had severe asthma, whose rescue inhaler Mrs. Voss kept in a locked cabinet on the far side of the classroom. A father whose daughter had a heart condition and fainted and was told in front of the class to stop being dramatic. A woman whose little boy had a peanut allergy and was made to sit at the ordinary lunch table because the allergy-safe table was, in Mrs. Voss's words, special treatment for a kid who wanted attention. Different children, different conditions, the same teacher, the same principal, Mr. Radley, who had waved every one of them off. One mother wrote that she had been called in for a meeting where Mrs. Voss suggested in front of her that her son's inhaler use was a habit he needed to be weaned off of, like a pacifier. Another wrote that when her daughter fainted, Mrs. Voss made her walk it off. A grandmother messaged to say her grandson had come home for months insisting he was not allowed to be sick at school, and she had thought it was a saying he picked up until now. I sat at my kitchen table reading message after message with my coffee going cold, and a feeling settled over me that was worse than anger. It was recognition. Every one of these parents had done exactly what I had done. They had brought the letters and the plans and the doctor's notes. They had been patient and then not patient. They had been told they were overreacting. And then, one by one, worn down, they had gone quiet because fighting a school that has already decided you are the problem is like pushing on a wall. I had almost gone quiet too. I started a second file. Thursday, Dr. Amari called to check on Sadie, and I told her what I had found and what had happened in the hallway. She was silent for a long moment. "You need to go over the principal's head," she said, "today." I asked her who was above him. "The district superintendent. Her name is Dr. Halloran. And if you want, I will send my letter and Sadie's hospital records straight to her office myself so that nothing gets lost or buried." She did exactly that. Friday morning, I called the district office and asked for an appointment with Dr. Halloran. The secretary told me the superintendent was extremely busy this week. I said, as steadily as I could, that I had documentation showing children with medical conditions were being denied life-saving care at Bellhaven Elementary, and that my 7-year-old had gone into a hypoglycemic seizure in a classroom hallway on Monday and nearly died. There was a long pause on the line. The secretary said she could see me that afternoon at 3. At 3, I sat across from Dr. Halloran in an office with framed diplomas on the wall and a cold cup of coffee between us. She was polite and distant and clearly braced for an overprotective parent she would need to manage. Then I opened the folder. I set Dr. Amari's letter in front of her. I set the monitor graph in front of her, the 2 weeks of red valleys, and I put my finger on the worst one. This is my 7-year-old's blood sugar inside your school, 39. This drop lasted 48 minutes because her teacher had switched off the alarm that was supposed to catch it. I set the hospital record on top, and this is Monday, 29, a hypoglycemic seizure on the floor of your hallway with paramedics because that same teacher took her monitor off her body and locked her sugar in a drawer. Dr. Halloran's polite expression began to come apart as she read. I kept going, and it is not just my daughter. I laid down the second file. A boy whose asthma inhaler is locked across the room. A girl with a heart condition told she is a drama queen. A boy with a peanut allergy made to sit where the peanuts are. All in the same class. All of it reported to Mr. Radley. All of it ignored. Dr. Halloran read for a long time without saying anything. When she finally looked up, her face had changed completely. Have you kept your daughter home? Since Monday, I said. She was in the hospital overnight. I am not sending her back into that building. Dr. Halloran picked up her phone and asked her secretary to get the district's attorney on the line right away. Then she looked at me. I need you to leave everything you have with me tonight. All of it. Copies, I said. The originals stay in my hands. She almost smiled. Smart, she said. She told me she was placing Mrs. Voss on leave that very afternoon, before the meeting, before anything else, so that my daughter would never be in a room with her again no matter what the board decided. She said she should have caught this months ago, when the first complaints came in, and that she was going to spend a long time asking herself how a principal had kept them from reaching her desk. She was not performing. There was a crack in her voice that she was working to keep out of it. Before I left, she said one more thing. My own sister is diabetic, she said. I grew up watching my mother count out juice boxes for the school year. I know exactly what a monitor is for. I am so sorry it took you standing in my office to make me act like it. That afternoon, the district attorney called me himself. His name was Corbin Wells, and he did not sound like a man reading from a script. He had already gone through the copies. He asked me to walk him through the timeline one more time, slowly, and I could hear him typing as I talked. When I reached the muted monitor, he stopped me. She switched off a continuous glucose monitor on a type 1 diabetic child, he said, repeatedly. On purpose. Yes, I said. And confiscated the emergency glucose. Yes. He was quiet. And on Monday, the child seized, at 29, with the monitor off her body. Yes. Ma'am, I have to be honest with you about where this stands, he said. This is not just a policy failure or a paperwork problem. Turning off a diabetic child's alarm and taking away her sugar, and then telling paramedics not to treat her while she seizes, that is the kind of thing that gets a person charged with reckless endangerment of a child. And from the numbers in this file, your daughter came closer than anyone in that building seems willing to admit. I sat down on my kitchen floor with the phone against my ear. Say that again, I said. If your daughter had gone down without her monitor and without her sugar, with a teacher who had already decided every symptom was fake, and no nurse happened to walk by, she would not have been treated in time. He let it sit. The district is exposed here from every direction. Federal disability law, state child protection statutes. Our insurance will not touch the willful denial of medical care. But underneath all of that, a child was nearly killed on purpose, and that is the part that matters to me. He told me the paramedic had already filed his run report, and that the hospital physician had already filed a suspected neglect report, and that both of those existed completely independent of me, which meant this could not be waved away as one upset parent. 2 mandatory reporters watched the aftermath and wrote it down, he said. That changes what I can do. I want you to understand that whatever happens with the school board, there is now a separate track, and that track does not answer to the superintendent or to the principal. It answers to the law. I asked him what happened now. He said Dr. Halloran was calling an emergency school board meeting for the following Wednesday, and that he wanted me there, in front of the board, telling them exactly what I had told him. Bring the folder, he said. Bring every page. The boardroom filled up faster than anyone had planned for. They had set out 4 rows of folding chairs, and it was nowhere near enough. Parents lined the back wall 3 deep. Teachers stood in the doorway. A couple of reporters I did not recognize sat off to one side with notebooks open. I got there early and took a seat in the front row with my folder pressed flat against my knees, and my palms left damp marks on the cover before anyone had even spoken. Dr. Halloran sat at the head table with 7 board members. She kept glancing toward the double doors as if she were waiting for something to go wrong. Corbin Wells sat at a small side table with a legal pad and a thick binder squared up in front of him. Mrs. Voss was not there. Mr. Radley was not there. Their 2 empty places felt louder than anything anyone said. The board president was a heavy-set man with reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead. He tapped the microphone, winced at the squeal of feedback, and cleared his throat. We have received serious complaints regarding the denial of medical care to students at Bellhaven Elementary, he said. Several of the families involved are here tonight, and and we intend to hear from all of them. He looked down at a list and he called my name first. My legs did not want to hold me. The walk to the little podium was maybe 15 feet, and it felt like the length of a football field. I set my folder down, gripped the edges of the stand, and when I opened my mouth, my voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. My daughter Sadie is 7 years old, I said. She has had type 1 diabetes since she was 4. Her teacher, Mrs. Voss, decided that her blood sugar crashes were a performance. She muted my daughter's continuous glucose monitor because the alarm annoyed her. She confiscated my daughter's emergency glucose and locked it in a drawer. And this past Monday, my daughter had a seizure on the floor of the hallway outside that classroom at a blood sugar of 29, while her teacher stood over the paramedics and told them she was faking. The room went completely silent. I could hear the ceiling vents. I opened the folder, pulled out the monitor graph, and held it up so the letterhead showed. This is 2 weeks of my daughter's blood sugar inside your school. Every red mark is a dangerous low that went untreated. This one hit 39 and lasted 48 minutes because the alarm that should have caught it in 90 seconds had been switched off by an adult. I walked the graph up to the board president. He took it, and I watched his eyebrows climb toward his hairline. He passed it down the table, and I watched each board member's face fall a little further than the one before. Then I held up the hospital record. And this is the emergency room. Severe hypoglycemia. Blood glucose 29. Hypoglycemic seizure. A doctor will tell you 39 is not a discipline problem and 29 is not attention seeking. 29 is a body dying. That happened to my 7-year-old in your building because an adult decided her illness was a bad habit she needed to be broken of. I sat back down. My hands were shaking so hard I pressed them flat against my thighs to make them stop. A board member near the end of the table, a woman with short silver hair, raised a hand and leaned into her microphone. I have to ask, she said, and her voice was tight. When the paramedics arrived on Monday, what did the teacher do? I stood back up. My legs felt like water, but I made myself answer. She stood over them while they worked on my daughter, I said, and she told them my daughter was faking. She told them not to bother. She told them her mother encourages it. The paramedic will confirm this. It is in his report. The board member sat back like she had been pushed. She took off her glasses and put a hand over her mouth. Another board member wrote something down hard enough that I heard the pen. The room had gone from restless to still. The president called the next name. A woman stood, tall, with a graying braid over one shoulder. Her name was Priya Sethi. My daughter has a heart condition, she said. When her heart races too fast, she gets dizzy, and sometimes she faints. Mrs. Voss told her in front of the entire class to stop being a drama queen. When she actually fainted during a fire drill, Mrs. Voss announced that she had done it on purpose for attention. Her voice went hard and low. My daughter is 9 years old, and she is now afraid to tell any adult when her chest hurts, because the last adult she told stood over her and humiliated her while she was on the ground. She laid a cardiologist's report on the president's table and sat down. A heavy-set man went next. His name was Ronnie Fairbanks, and his voice came out rough. My boy has severe asthma, he said. His rescue inhaler is supposed to be within his reach at every moment of the day. Mrs. Voss kept it in a locked supply cabinet on the far side of the room and made him raise his hand and ask permission every time he needed it. One afternoon, he had an attack, a real one, and she made him finish a worksheet before she would get up and unlock the cabinet. He pulled a folded page out of his jacket and his hand shook. The lung doctor wrote this after that day, he said. It says that in a severe attack, a delay of even a few minutes can kill a child. She made my son do a worksheet while he could not breathe. He set the letter on the table and could not get another word out. A younger father stood next. His name was Elias Boone, and he held a laminated card in one hand. My son has a life-threatening peanut allergy, he said. This card explains it. It goes everywhere with him. There's supposed to be a nut-free table in the cafeteria, and there was, until Mrs. Voss decided it was babying him and told the lunch staff to seat everyone together. He held the card up higher. 3 weeks later, another kid opened a peanut butter cracker 2 seats down, and my boy's throat started to close. And he ended up in the nurse's room with his lips swollen and his eyes swollen, and me driving to the school not knowing if I would make it in time. His voice cracked on the last word. He was 6, he said. He is 6. And a grown woman decided that keeping him alive was spoiling him. Then a woman near the back stood without being called. Her name was Marisol Reyes, and her voice shook. My son had Mrs. Voss 2 years ago, she said. He is type 1, like your daughter. She turned off his monitor too. She called it a toy. She told him diabetics who really needed to eat did not do it in the middle of a lesson. She looked at me across the room. When I heard a little girl went down in that same classroom this week, I could not stay home. It could have been my boy. It almost was my boy. He came home shaking so many afternoons, and I did not know why. Because his monitor was off and he was too scared of her to tell me. She sat back down and put her face in her hands. The room was very quiet around her. Each parent laid down documentation. Each one of them had gone to Mr. Radley first. Each one had been told the teacher knew best and sent home. The room was leaning forward now, murmuring, angry. The president banged his gavel and turned to look hard at Dr. Halloran. Why did none of this reach this table before tonight, he said. Dr. Halloran's face was pale. Mr. Radley handled these at the building level, she said. He characterized them as parents overreacting to ordinary classroom management. I trusted his judgment. Her voice dropped so low the microphone barely caught it. I should not have. Corbin Wells stood up from the side table and carried his binder to the front of the room. I want to be very clear with this board about what we are actually actually looking at, he said. Under federal law, every one of these children has a documented disability and a legal right to accommodation, and denying that accommodation is a serious civil violation on its own. He turned a page. But the diabetes case is different in kind, not just in degree. Muting a continuous glucose monitor and confiscating emergency glucose from a type 1 diabetic child, and then telling paramedics not to treat her while she is seizing, is not a paperwork failure. If that child had died on Monday, and the medical records in my hand say that she could have, we would not be sitting in a boardroom tonight. We would be sitting in a criminal courtroom, and the charge would be reckless endangerment of a minor. The room went dead quiet. Even the reporters stopped writing for a second, and then their pens moved faster than before. Wells set the binder down on the table. The district's civil liability here is severe, he said. But I will tell you plainly, I did not take this job to shield the district from lawsuits. I took an oath that still means something to me, and what was done to these children in a public school offends it. This board needs to act tonight. The president called a 15-minute recess. The board members stood and gathered at the side of the room with Dr. Halloran and Wells, heads bent together, voices low and urgent. In the front row, the other parents turned toward me. Priya reached over and put her hand on my arm. "Thank you for going first," she said. "I filed a complaint 2 years ago, and when nobody answered it, I just gave up." "You did not give up," I said. "You are here." Ronnie leaned across the aisle, his eyes red-rimmed. "My son still asks me whether his teacher was right about him," he said. "Whether he really is a baby, about his breathing. Maybe now he will believe me when I tell him he was never the problem." Other parents drifted over, ones I had not seen speak yet. A woman named Mrs. Ashford, older, in a soft gray cardigan, took my hand between both of hers and held it. "My son had seizures," she said quietly, 4 years ago, in that same classroom, with that same teacher. She called it acting. She made him sit in the hall. I pulled him out and moved him to a school clear across town, and I never told a single soul why, because I did not believe for 1 second that anyone would care. When I heard about tonight, I drove 40 minutes to sit in this room. She squeezed my hand until it almost hurt. "I am so glad someone finally made them listen," she said. Elias Boone crouched down in front of me where I sat. "My son thinks he did something wrong," he said. "He thinks he got his teacher in trouble. How do I explain to a 6-year-old that he did not get anyone in trouble, that the trouble was already there?" I did not have an answer for him. None of us did. We just knew it in our bodies, all of us in that little cluster of folding chairs, that our kids had been carrying something that was never theirs to carry, and that we had spent months apologizing to schools for the crime of trying to keep our children breathing. Marisol Reyes was crying quietly. Priya had her arm around her. Ronnie kept clearing his throat and looking at the ceiling. For a few minutes, nobody said anything useful, and it was the most understood I had felt in a long time. The gavel came down again, and everyone found their seats. The board members walked back to the table with their faces set. The president leaned into the microphone. "We are voting tonight on emergency measures," he said. "First, effective immediately, every student in this district who has a documented medical condition will have their accommodation plan reviewed and verified within 30 days. Second, no staff member of this district may ever remove, disable, or restrict a student's medical device or emergency medication for any reason. Any violation is grounds for immediate dismissal." He looked down the table. All in favor. 7 hands went up. He turned to Dr. Halloran, and she stood, and this time she did not read from a paper. "Mrs. Voss is placed on administrative leave as of this moment, pending termination," she said. Then she paused, and her voice was steady. "Mr. Radley is also placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. He received a formal complaint about a child denied a rescue inhaler, a formal complaint about a child punished for fainting from a heart condition, a formal complaint about a diabetic child whose monitor had been disabled, and he buried every one of them. That is not a lapse in judgment. That is a choice he made over and over to protect an adult instead of the children in his care." The room broke into noise, some of it applause. The president let it run a moment before he brought the gavel down. Then Corbin Wells stood up one final time that night. "I am opening a full review of every complaint filed against Mrs. Voss across her 18 years in this district," he said, "and every complaint that Mr. Radley received and chose not to forward. We are going to find out exactly how many children this happened to, and exactly how long it went on." He paused. "I expect that number to be worse than anyone in this room wants to believe." He looked directly at me when he said the last part, and I understood that he was making me a promise. The meeting adjourned. I stayed in my chair for a moment, unable to make my legs cooperate, and then I walked out into the cold parking lot and got into my car and called my sister Nia. My voice cracked before I could get a single word out. They listened. I finally managed. They actually listened. She stayed on the phone while I cried into the steering wheel of a car that was not going anywhere. "It is not fake," I kept saying, as though I still needed to hear someone else say it back to me. "She was never faking." "I know," Nia said. "I know she wasn't. You made them see it." She stayed with me on the line the whole way to my street, talking about nothing, about her kids, about a show she was watching, letting the ordinary sound of her voice pull me back down to earth, because she knew that if she let me sit in silence, I would fall apart at the wheel. When I pulled into my driveway, she said one more thing. "Do you remember," she said, "when you were first diagnosed, how scared you were that people would treat you like you were making it up?" I did remember. I remembered being 15 and being told by a gym teacher to run through it. "You spent your whole life proving your own body was real," Nia said, "and tonight you did it for your daughter too." I sat in the dark car and could not not speak for a while. Then I thanked her, and I went inside. Sadie was already asleep, her new monitor glowing softly on the nightstand. The number in range and holding steady. The alarm turned all the way up the way it was always supposed to be. I stood in her doorway and watched her breathe for a long time. 2 days after the meeting, the district sent a letter home with every child at Bellhaven. It was written in careful, cautious language, acknowledging that concerns had been raised about medical accommodations, inviting any family with a similar experience to contact Corbin Wells's office directly. It gave a phone number and an email. I heard from other parents that the phones did not stop for days. The parents group that I had posted in quietly turned into something else. People who had never spoken up started telling their stories in it, one after another. And every few messages, another name for Mrs. Voss's classroom appeared. A kid held back from the water fountain during a heat warning even though he was on a medication that made him overheat. A girl with a hearing aid told to stop pretending she could not hear. A boy who wet himself because he was refused a bathroom pass for a bladder condition and then was mocked for it. Not all of it was medical device life or death like Sadie, but all of it was the same thing at the root: a grown woman deciding that a child's real need was a performance, and a principal who made sure the complaints never left the building. Marisol Reyes messaged me privately. She said her son had asked her that morning whether it was true the teacher was in trouble. When she told him yes, he cried, and he said he thought he had made it up, that maybe he really had been faking all along because a grown-up had told him so for a whole year. Reading that, I understood that this was never only about my daughter. Corbin Wells started calling the families back one by one, taking statements, building a record. The review took 3 weeks. I did not send Sadie back to that classroom while it ran, and Corbin Wells called me twice a week to keep me updated, which I later found out he did not do for most people. With each call, the number grew. He found 11 prior complaints against Mrs. Voss for treating a child's medical condition as an act, a boy with epilepsy who was made to sit facing the wall during his auras, a girl with a feeding tube who was told she was disgusting for using it in the cafeteria, a child with a severe nut allergy whose safe snacks were thrown away because Mrs. Voss decided the family was overstating it, a boy with a bladder condition, refused the bathroom, mocked when he could not hold it, another child with type 1, years before Sadie, whose parents had quietly transferred out of the district, the same way Mrs. Ashford had, without ever telling anyone why. Wells read them to me one at a time over the phone, in the flat, careful voice of a man who had learned to keep himself steady, and after the 6th or 7th, I had to sit down. 18 years, he said. She had done a version of this for 18 years, and every year there were new children who did not know that the ones before them had gone through the same thing and been told the same lie. Some of the families had fought and lost. Most had done what parents do when the whole system tells them they are the problem. They went quiet. They moved their kids. They started to wonder if maybe they really were overreacting. That was the part that kept me up, Wells said. Not the cruelty, the way she made them doubt themselves. And in Mr. Radley's own files, buried in a bottom drawer, Wells found something that made his voice go flat and hard over the phone. 9 written complaints, he said. 9. Every one of them requesting a formal review. He answered none of them. Instead, he wrote private notes for himself, calling the parents difficult, calling the children coddled, calling their doctors alarmist. There is a note in your daughter's file, dated the week before the board meeting. Do you want to know what it says? I said yes. It says, and I am reading it exactly. Mother is a nurse, will likely make trouble, recommend minimal engagement. I closed my eyes. He knew. I said, he knew she was sick, and he wrote down that I would be trouble. He knew, Wells said. And now there is a paper trail in his own handwriting that proves he knew and did nothing on purpose. On a Monday evening, the board met again, and this time the room was even fuller because word had spread all over town. Wells laid out the full review, complaint by complaint, 18 years of it, up on a screen the whole room could read. He showed the dates. He showed the conditions, epilepsy and asthma and heart problems and allergies and 2 other diabetic children besides Sadie. He showed in Mr. Radley's own handwriting the notes calling parents difficult and children coddled, and the room made a low sound every time a new one appeared. He put my daughter's file up last. He read the note out loud, the one that said mother is a nurse, will likely make trouble, recommend minimal engagement, and then he read, right below it in the same file, the hospital record. Blood glucose 29, hypoglycemic seizure. This is what minimal engagement looked like, he said, and he let the screen sit there for a long moment so no one could look away from it. The board members did not interrupt him once. When he finished, the room was so quiet that the hum of the lights sounded loud. The board went into closed session, and we waited out in the hallway, all of us, the parents who had spoken and the ones who had only listened. Priya stood next to me with her arms wrapped around herself. Ronnie paced. Marisol Reyes had brought her son this time, and the boy sat on a bench swinging his legs, too young to understand exactly what was happening, but old enough to feel that it mattered. Mrs. Ashford held a paper cup of coffee she never drank. 40 minutes passed. Nobody talked much. Every time the closed door made a sound, we all turned toward it. I kept thinking about the note in Sadie's file, the one that called me trouble, and I thought, good, let me be trouble. Let me be the most trouble this district has ever seen if this is what it takes. Then the doors opened, and an aide waved us back in, and we filed into our seats, and the room was full again, and holding its breath. The president put on his reading glasses and read from a single sheet of paper. Based on the findings of this review, the board votes to terminate the employment of Mrs. Voss, effective immediately, for gross misconduct endangering endangering the health and the lives of students in her care. The room was silent. He did not stop there. The board also votes to terminate the employment of Mr. I. Radley, effective immediately, for repeatedly concealing complaints of medical neglect and for failing in his most basic duty to protect the children of this district. Somebody in the back began to clap, and then the whole room was on its feet clapping, and I sat still with my hands folded in my lap and felt something I had been holding in my chest for a month finally let go. But Corbin Wells was not finished. He stood, and the room went quiet again, and he held up a single page. This afternoon, my office forwarded the complete file to the county prosecutor, he said. He looked out at the crowd, and then he looked straight at me. As of 2 hours ago, Mrs. Voss has been formally charged with reckless endangerment of a child and criminal neglect. She surrendered to the sheriff's department this evening. Her teaching license has been suspended by the state as of today, and the state board has already notified this district that it intends to revoke it permanently. She will never stand in front of a classroom again.